Ethan was only 5 when he first said the house had secrets. His parents smiled at his imagination, but then he found a dusty collar engraved with the name Buddy. Soon after, scratching noises came from a sealed wall in the basement. What they broke open revealed not just a starving dog, but the first clue in a chain of horrors left behind by the previous owner. A boy and his dog became inseparable, yet danger grew closer every night. Want to see how this bond saved an entire family? Like this story and hit subscribe for more. They pulled up to the curb on a Saturday that wore October like an old coat. Sun low air thin, the maples on Hawthorne Drive dropping leaves in quiet red spirals. John Carter cut the ignition and sat with both hands on the wheel as if the car might float away without him. Beside him, Anna leaned forward studying the white two-story with the blue porch rail and the neat square of lawn that listed slightly toward the sidewalk, the way old lawns do in older American towns. In the back seat, 5-year-old Ethan had fallen asleep with one sneaker still untied, the loose lace pinned beneath a juice box. "We made it," John said, not to claim victory, but to steady the moment. Anna smiled with a small intake of breath, a private count to 3 before a plunge. "We did." He touched her knuckles. She squeezed back, then twisted around and brushed the hair from Ethan's forehead. It felt like ceremony, their small family choosing a corner of the world and asking it to choose them back. The realtor's sold rider still hung from the yard sign as if the place were waving goodbye to someone else. John had read the inspection 3 times, printed copies, and tucked them into a manila folder that lived in the glove box like a promise. He liked clean checklists, electrical roof radon foundation, each with its tidy grade. He liked the word typical, and the report had given him that gift more than once. Typical where? Typical settlement. Nothing structural. Inside, the air smelled of latex paint and lemon oil. The staging furniture had gone, leaving blank rooms that echoed in a friendly way. Anna set a box on the kitchen counter and opened cabinets with a careful rhythm, as if she were learning the house's good side. She lifted a glass, wiped its edge with a dish towel out of habit, and held it to the window to catch a scrap of late sun. "We'll need curtains," she said. "Not fussy, just something to teach the light some manners." John laughed and kept unpacking plates stacked just so, cereal-lined in a neat row like east-facing bricks. "Where's my dinosaur?" Ethan asked from the doorway in a voice thick with sleep. "Top of the blue box," Anna said, already reaching for him. He wriggled free with the impatience of a child who wants to greet his map of a new world and sprint across it. "Can I look around?" "Stay where we can hear you," John said, then softened it with a grin. "And keep your shoes tied, buddy." Ethan nodded solemnly, the first of many solemn nods he would give the house, and padded into the hallway, the sound of his steps tapping out a bright 3-beat measure. In the living room, the fireplace sat like a polite guest, original brick painted white, a clean black box, no soot, no story. John knelt to pull off the vent cover to dust it, and found the screws had been replaced recently. Someone had cared enough to make small things right. He liked that. He liked the work of men he would never meet. Out front, a delivery van idled and coughed away. Mrs. Walker from next door drifted over in a cardigan the color of oatmeal and introduced herself with a plate of brownies that tasted like the kind neighbors bring to funerals and first days in equal measure. "I taught at the elementary school before they gave me a gold watch and a cake shaped like the gym," she said with a smile that earned its lines. "If you need a recommendation for a plumber, I know who shows up and who only promises to." She lowered her voice a notch, not conspiratorial, just kind. "The gentleman who owned this house before you was quiet, kept odd hours. I assume your agent told you he relocated." "That's the word we got," John said, easing a hand into his pocket for the keys he already had. "Relocated." Mrs. Walker's face held steady. "Well, if you need anything, I'm home before 4 and after 7, and I still keep a decent first aid kit." She touched Ethan's head as if knighting him. He accepted this as his due and returned to inspecting the baseboards with the concentration of an apprentice. By late afternoon, they had made a little order towels folded in the hall closet, silverware traded from plastic to a drawer, a magnet stuck to the fridge to trap a list that Anna started without noticing. John carried a lamp up the stairs to the small bedroom with the view of the maple, set it on the floor, and tugged the pull chain twice. Warm light gathered in the corner with a sigh. "Feels like a house," he said. "That's because it is one," Anna answered softly, pleased with the way the sound held in the room. "Ethan." His reply came from somewhere below, echoing through wood. "I found a secret." The two words landed in John's chest with a light thud that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the million-mile run of parenthood. He and Anna followed the sound to the base of the staircase. Ethan sat on the lowest step with his legs tucked tight, his palm open like a shelled egg. In it, a leather collar dried to a dark brown with a brass tag turned green at the edges. Anna crouched the floor, pressing back through her knees. "Where did you get that?" Ethan pointed under the overhang where the riser met the trim. A sliver of molding had a hairline gap. A small hand could slip through. It was stuck in there. John took the collar gently. The leather creaked the way old belts do when they remember a waist. He turned the tag toward the light. The letters were not elegant, just stamped hard enough to last Buddy. A telephone number followed 7 digits without an area code, which put the collar in another decade. For a breath, no one spoke. The house felt like a person you've just learned one true thing about. Someone's dog, Anna said. Not past tense. Someone's. "He's probably on a farm now," Ethan offered, repeating a thing adults say when they need a softer lie. Anna smoothed his hair. "Maybe he moved with his family." John laid the collar on the entry table, not ready to throw it away, not ready to keep it. "We'll ask the realtor," he said. "There's probably nothing to it." They worked through the evening with the modest bustle that turns strangers into a household pizza plates, the scrape of a chair, the clean fatigue of a day used up well. After Ethan's bath, after a story about a cowboy with a good horse and better manners, John carried him to bed and listened to the pipes tick into quiet. When the house had finally exhaled, a different sound reached up from below, a thin, scratching, faint as a pencil on a page. It came in 3 beats, rested, then 3 again. Anna stopped halfway through folding a blanket, head tilted. "Do you hear that, John?" stilled the practical part of him, assembling possibilities, settling wood a branch at the eaves. A mouse with more nerve than sense. "It's nothing," he said, though the word felt a size too small. "These old places talk on their first night. We'll set a trap if we have to." Ethan, already drifting, murmured Buddy's downstairs with the certainty of a boy who believes in the names of things. Anna kissed his temple. "Sleep," she whispered. "Tomorrow we'll make pancakes." In bed, their voices fell to the hush people use when a new space still feels like it's listening. "We should get the furnace serviced," Anna said, "and seal that gap under the stair." "I'll add it to the list," John replied, rolling onto his side to study the rectangle of streetlight on the wall. He tried to fit the day into his chosen frame inspection checklists, keys, ordinary rituals you could trust. Somewhere in the frame now sat a small collar with a name that once meant "Come sit heel, good boy." The scratching came again, a patient, almost polite sound. John's jaw tightened and let go. "Tomorrow," he said into the dark. "We'll check the basement tomorrow." Down the hall, Ethan turned in his sleep and reached for the dinosaur he had tucked under the pillow. The house held him the way houses do when they want to prove themselves, wood listing to wood, winter held at the windows for now. At the bottom of the stairs, on the little entry table, the collar lay with its tag tilted toward the ceiling fan's slow drift. Buddy catching a thin spill of light and keeping it. Sunday morning stretched across the kitchen with the smell of coffee and the hiss of bacon in the skillet sunlight dripping through the bare windows in gold rectangles. John sat with the paper spread across his lap, his eyes running the columns without taking much in his mind, circling back to the thin scratching he had heard hours before. Anna rinsed dishes, humming absently, her thoughts pinned to the list taped on the refrigerator when she remembered the box of cleaning supplies left in the garage. She tugged open the side door to let in air and stepped down onto the cool concrete floor. The garage smelled faintly of rubber and paint thinner, the typical inventory of new homeowners. But there was something else buried under it, something dry and musky. Near the corner, stacked against a wall of half-painted drywall, sat a torn paper bag. Anna crouched, brushing a layer of dust from its folded edge, and read the words "dog food" stamped across the top. The bag had been opened, rolled shut without much care, and forgotten. Her fingers brushed the expiration date 14 months out of season. She carried it inside, holding it like a question. "John," she said, setting it on the counter. "Look." He glanced up, frowned, and read the faded print. That must have belonged to the previous owner. Just leftover junk. His voice sounded practiced, like a man filing the moment into a category that did not require his fear. Anna pressed her lips together. But why leave this and nothing else? He shrugged, but his hand rested on the edge of the counter longer than necessary, as if the weight of the bag pressed into his palm. Upstairs, Ethan ran from his room with hair still sleep-ruffled, his dinosaur clutched in one hand. "It's not the house making noise," he insisted, his voice carrying a clarity that made both parents stop. "It's Buddy. He's in the hidden room." John looked at him, half amused, half troubled. "What hidden room?" Champ Ethan stomped his small sneaker against the floorboard. "The one behind the wall in the basement. I can hear him scratching from there." John folded the paper, exhaling slowly. "There's no hidden room, Ethan. The floor plans are in the folder." I looked at them, but the boy shook his head with a kind of stubborn grief that startled Anna. "You didn't hear it like I did." "He's in there." Anna crouched, meeting her son's earnest eyes. "You heard it last night." Ethan nodded fiercely. "He wants out." The basement was cooler than the rest of the house, its cinder block walls painted white. A thin rug rolled out near the washer as if to pretend at comfort. John tapped the wall with his knuckles, then ran his hand over the seam where drywall met the concrete foundation. "See nothing unusual. Solid." Ethan pressed his ear against the cold surface, waiting. A long moment passed, silence thick enough to feel. Then a faint scuff echoed so light it might have been dust shifting. His face lit. "There. Didn't you hear?" John straightened, jaw set, eyes moving toward Anna, who stood at the foot of the stairs with her arms folded, watching both of them. "Probably pipes," he said, but the certainty had drained from his voice. "Old houses do that." Ethan's small hand tugged at his father's sleeve. "It's not pipes, it's Buddy." That evening after dinner, Anna set the old dog food bag in the trash bin by the curb, but as she walked back, she noticed crumbs trailing along the garage floor as though something small had tried to tear into the bag. She crouched, studying the faint marks, half convinced they were no more than rodents. Yet the marks ran toward the baseboard, stopping at a section of wall that looked newer than the rest. She did not mention it immediately. In the living room, Ethan was drawing with crayons, sketching thick brown and black strokes that shaped into a large dog with sharp ears. He added a box around it, shaded dark. Anna touched the page gently. "Is that Buddy?" Ethan nodded without looking up. "He's waiting." John leaned against the doorway, trying to balance the line between patience and authority. "It's just your imagination, son. There is no dog in the walls. Dogs don't live like that." Ethan's crayon slowed but did not stop. "Then why does he keep calling me?" Later that night, while Ethan slept, John retrieved the blueprints from the manila folder. He spread them across the dining table, tracing lines with his forefinger. Each room was accounted for basement laundry storage, no extras, no mysteries. Yet the section beneath the staircase seemed thicker than it needed to be, the wall depth oddly expanded. He measured with a ruler, frowned, measured again. Anna came in rubbing lotion across her hands and leaned over his shoulder. "What?" He tapped the paper. "This space. Look at the thickness here. Doesn't make sense." She studied the lines. Maybe it's just how they drew it. He wanted to agree, but something in his chest tightened. He folded the plans too quickly, tucking them back into the folder as if hiding them from his own mind. "We'll sort it out when we renovate." Near midnight, Anna woke to a soft thud below the sound of something brushing against hollow wood. She lay still, listening, heart slow but firm. Beside her, John stirred but did not wake. She slipped quietly to the hallway, her bare feet pressing cold against the floorboards, and listened again. The house held its breath, silent as a closed book. She returned to bed, though the image of the dog food bag, the crumbs on the garage floor, and the faint scratches on the basement wall threaded together in her mind like a knot tightening. The next morning brought a pale rain tapping against the windows. Ethan stood at the top of the stairs, solemn as a sentinel. "He's weaker today," he said softly, more to himself than to his parents. "If we don't help soon, he won't make it." Anna felt her stomach twist, not because she believed, but because of how completely Ethan did. She glanced at John, who was buttoning his shirt for work, his jaw tight. "We'll look again," she said, her voice even. John shot her a quick glance, half protest, half gratitude. For the first time since moving in, she wasn't sure which one of them needed convincing more, their son or themselves. The basement bulb flickered once, then gave out with a faint pop that left the room in an uneasy dimness, the washer's hum filling the silence like a muted drum. John sighed, balancing on the second rung of the stepladder, twisting the glass from its socket. He muttered to himself about old wiring as he slid a fresh bulb into place, the new light spilling against the walls in a harsher glow than before. For the first time, he noticed a section of paint that looked different, a rectangle of wall near the far corner brushed with a duller shade of white, as though someone had rushed to cover a stain or sealed something deliberately. His hand lingered against it, fingers pressing the rougher surface. He called up the stairs to Anna. "Did they mention anything about patched walls in the disclosure?" She answered no, her voice echoing faintly, and he let his hand drop, forcing a laugh. Probably just sloppy renovation. He turned away, but his shoulders remained stiff as though the wall had touched him back. Anna later folded laundry at the kitchen table, her movements neat and precise, but her eyes betrayed distraction, lingering too long on each shirt. She asked if John had seen anything unusual while fixing the bulb. He hesitated, then said, "Nothing worth mentioning. Just a bad paint job." She accepted it outwardly, yet inside the unease thickened the memory of crumbs in the garage and Ethan's unwavering claims refusing to fade. Ethan himself had grown restless, wandering from room to room with the nervous energy of a child who senses what adults deny. One rainy afternoon, Anna was chopping vegetables when she realized the house was quieter than usual. She called for Ethan, expecting his quick reply, but the silence stretched thin. Her knife paused midair, her chest tightening as she checked the living room, then the hallway, then his bedroom, each empty. The toy dinosaur lay abandoned on the rug, its plastic face turned sideways as if in warning. Panic sharpened her steps as she hurried downstairs, but the basement door was closed, latch still set. She searched the yard, the bathroom, her voice rising. Then, suddenly, the sound of feet pounding the stairs came from below. Ethan burst into the kitchen, breathless eyes wide as if carrying a secret too large for him. "I saw him," he cried, his small voice echoing with conviction. "I saw Buddy in the room. He's down there." Anna dropped the knife onto the cutting board, the clatter loud in the silence. "What room?" she whispered. Ethan pointed toward the basement, his hand trembling but firm. the one behind the wall. I went in, but he ran away before I could touch him. John appeared from the front hall, his face pale from the urgency in his son's tone. He knelt, gripping Ethan's shoulders. Ethan listened carefully. "You were gone only a few minutes. Where exactly did you go?" Ethan's breath hitched. The wall opened. I smelled something bad, like wet dirt and old food. Then I saw him, his eyes looking at me. He wagged his tail, but then he was gone. John and Anna exchanged a glance heavy with dread. John's rational voice returned, though softer than usual. "You must have imagined it, champ. Maybe you fell asleep for a second, dreamed it." Ethan shook his head fiercely, tears beginning to form. "No, I didn't dream it. He's there and he's waiting." The kitchen filled with silence, broken only by the steady drip of rain against the window. Anna crouched beside her son, brushing his hair from his damp forehead. "What did the room look like?" she asked gently. Ethan hesitated, then whispered, "It was dark, but the walls were rough, not like ours. It smelled like something was trapped too long." Later that night, John went alone to the basement with a flashlight, each step echoing in the hollow space. He stood before the mismatched paint, the rectangle glaring beneath the beam. He pressed his ear against it, holding his breath. For a long moment, nothing. Then, faintly, a sound like a sigh carried through the wall. He stepped back quickly, knocking the flashlight against the floor, the beam spinning wildly. He forced himself to stillness, whispering, "Pipes. Just pipes." Yet as he turned away, the smell Ethan had described drifted faintly damp, sour, undeniable. Upstairs, Anna checked on Ethan, who had finally fallen asleep clutching his blanket. She lingered at his bedside, troubled by how tightly he held on to belief, how his imagination seemed less like invention and more like memory. She whispered a prayer over him, though she wasn't sure who it was for her son, the dog he swore he saw, or herself. When John returned, his face was tight, his lips thin, and she did not ask what he had heard. The silence between them was answer enough. In the days that followed, Ethan's insistence only grew. He began leaving bowls of water near the basement stairs, muttering promises to the unseen companion. John tried to throw them away, but Anna stopped him, her hand firm on his arm. "Let him," she said softly. "It costs us nothing." But she did not tell John that twice she had woken in the night to faint scratching, always near the corner of the basement wall, always just long enough to make her question whether she dreamed. The house no longer felt new. Its painted walls and polished floors now carried undercurrents of something unspoken, something waiting. Every corner seemed to hold its breath. Every silence stretched into listening. And though John told himself again and again that nothing was behind that wall, he could not shake the memory of the mismatched paint, the sour smell, and the quiet voice of his son echoing, "I saw him." Anna could not shake the memory of Ethan's trembling words, the smell he described, and John's quiet admission that something about the basement wall felt wrong. On a Saturday afternoon, with the house wrapped in the muted quiet of steady rain, she took a flashlight and crept downstairs. John was outside fixing a loose gutter. Ethan was in his room coloring, and for once she felt brave enough to face what had haunted their nights. She crouched near the uneven paint and pressed her cheek close to the cold plaster, angling the flashlight to find the smallest imperfections. There it was barely visible, a hairline crack no thicker than a pencil mark. She inhaled sharply, steadying her hand, and aimed the beam directly through the slit. For several seconds, only darkness stared back at her. Then just as she started to pull away, two glimmers caught the light, twin orbs reflecting with a wet shine. Her breath caught in her throat. They blinked. She stumbled back, hand pressed to her chest, the flashlight trembling. The sound of claws scraping faintly against concrete followed a soft whimper rising as though answering her gasp. She rushed upstairs, calling for John. her voice urgent enough to cut through the rain and hammering. He came in quickly, tools still in hand, alarmed by her pale face. She struggled to explain, but finally whispered, "There are eyes behind that wall." John tried to reason, telling her light plays tricks, but her insistence and the raw edge in her tone silenced him. They waited until Ethan was asleep that evening, his small body curled on the couch, before returning to the basement together. This time John knelt, pressing his ear close, flashlight steady. At first only silence, then unmistakable the faintest sound of breathing, shallow and labored. He closed his eyes, jaw tightening. "Something is in there," he admitted at last. The decision to break through was not made lightly. Anna feared what they might find, whether it was alive or long gone, but the thought of leaving it sealed gnawed at her conscience. They moved Ethan to his room, reassuring him it was just a small repair, then gathered tools. John's first hammer strike rang through the basement like a gunshot, plaster dust falling in small clouds. The smell that escaped was immediate and sour, damp with decay and desperation. Anna covered her mouth, eyes watering, but urged him on. Strike by strike, the false wall began to crumble, revealing the darkness within. When the opening was finally wide enough, John shone the flashlight inside. A narrow crawl space appeared barely larger than a closet, lined with rough concrete and littered with scraps of torn fabric. And there, pressed against the far corner, lay a German shepherd ribs jutting out like broken beams, fur-matted and filthy eyes wide from the sudden intrusion of light. He did not lunge, did not bark, only stared, his body trembling from exhaustion. John froze, whispering, "Oh my God," the words falling flat against the hollow walls. Before either parent could act, Ethan appeared at the top of the basement stairs, awakened by the noise. He descended quickly, despite their protests, slipping past Anna's outstretched arm, his small feet carrying him straight toward the opening. "Buddy," he cried, voice cracking with relief. The dog's ears twitched, and in a burst of impossible strength, he dragged himself forward, collapsing halfway, but pushing on until his nose met the boy's hand through the gap. His tongue flicked weakly, a gesture of recognition and trust, not aggression. Ethan laughed through tears, pressing his forehead against the dog's muzzle. "I told you he was here." Anna knelt beside her son, overcome with a mixture of horror at the sight and awe at the resilience of life clinging to such a frail frame. She whispered to John, "He's still alive. We have to help him now." John wasted no time tearing at the remaining plaster until the hole was wide enough for the animal to squeeze through. Slowly, painfully, Buddy crawled out his legs, buckling beneath him as soon as he reached open ground. His smell filled the room, acrid and raw, but his eyes never left Ethan, his tail giving the faintest wag against the cement floor. Anna rushed upstairs for water and a towel, her heart racing with both fear and determination. When she returned, Buddy had collapsed against Ethan, head resting in the boy's lap, chest rising and falling shallowly but rhythmically. John crouched nearby, torn between shock and anger, muttering about how anyone could do this. Anna soaked the towel, gently wiping the filth from Buddy's face, whispering words of comfort as if he were another child needing reassurance. Ethan, beaming through tears, whispered to the dog, "You're safe now. We'll never leave you again." His small hands stroked the shepherd's ears with surprising gentleness. Buddy closed his eyes, surrendering to the touch, his breathing slowing but steady, as though trusting completely for the first time in months. The basement that had once felt like a place of secrecy now transformed into a place of revelation, but its walls held more questions than answers. Who had sealed the dog inside, why he was left to suffer, and how he had survived so long with nothing but darkness for company remained mysteries pressing against the Carters' thoughts. John insisted they call for help, though he hesitated between the vet and the authorities, uncertain where to begin. Anna agreed, but knew one thing for certain: they could not turn away now. As they carried Buddy carefully upstairs, wrapped in a blanket, the weight of responsibility settled on their shoulders. Ethan refused to leave his side, walking beside his father, with one hand still stroking the dog's paw. The house felt different already, no longer just a structure of walls and paint, but a place where secrets had been forced into the open. And though exhaustion pulled at every part of them, the sight of Ethan and Buddy together lit something steady, a bond forming before their very eyes. The following morning, the Carters carried Buddy gently to the car, wrapped in a blanket, his frail body barely stirring, though his eyes stayed fixed on Ethan as if drawing strength from the boy's nearness. The drive to the local veterinary clinic was tense and quiet, rain streaking across the windshield, while John gripped the wheel tightly and Anna cradled Buddy's head, whispering soft reassurances more to herself than to the animal. Ethan sat close, his small hand resting on the dog's paw, refusing to let go, even as the car jolted over potholes. At the clinic, Dr. Peterson, a seasoned veterinarian with years of quiet composure in the face of suffering, examined Buddy carefully. Her brows furrowed as her hands moved across his protruding ribs, her stethoscope pressed to his chest, her eyes narrowing when she checked his gums and tongue for signs of hydration. She finally straightened and looked at the family with a mixture of astonishment and concern. "This dog has been confined for months," she said softly. "But what puzzles me is how he has not died from thirst. Malnutrition explains his frame, but survival without proper water. That is harder to make sense of." John asked whether there was any chance water had seeped through the wall somehow, and Dr. Peterson admitted perhaps condensation or rainwater could have trickled in, but she shook her head, still baffled. She prescribed fluids, small frequent meals, and strict rest, warning that Buddy's recovery would be slow and uncertain. When they returned home, Anna prepared a small bowl of softened food, while John set up a temporary bed for Buddy in the living room near the couch. They placed the bowl close to his muzzle, encouraging him with gentle words, but Buddy only turned his head aside, his eyes dull and uninterested. Anna tried again with her hand, offering the softened kibble piece by piece, yet the shepherd's jaw remained tightly shut. Frustration and worry pressed on her chest until Ethan knelt down beside the dog, his voice calm and patient. "It's okay, Buddy," he said softly. "You're safe now. I'll stay with you." He dipped his fingers into the bowl, brought them near Buddy's mouth, and whispered encouragement. Slowly, with visible effort, Buddy opened his mouth and took the morsel, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. Relief washed over the room, though it carried a strange undertone of confusion. Over the next days, a pattern emerged. Buddy would eat, but only when Ethan sat beside him. If Anna or John tried without the boy present, the dog refused, turning his head toward the wall until Ethan returned. At night, Buddy whimpered softly until Ethan dragged his blanket down to the living room, curling up beside the makeshift dog bed. The moment the boy settled, Buddy relaxed his breathing, evening out his body finally at rest. Anna found the sight tender yet unsettling, her 5-year-old curled beside a starving animal, both clinging to each other as though nothing else in the world could comfort them. John tried to rationalize it, saying trauma had made the dog cautious of adults while a child seemed less threatening, but the explanation felt thin against the intensity of Buddy's attachment. Even Dr. Peterson, when they returned for a follow-up, raised her eyebrows at the way Buddy perked up only when Ethan entered the room. "This kind of exclusive bond is unusual," she said carefully. "It's as if he has decided Ethan is his only source of safety." She advised patience, suggesting time might broaden Buddy's trust, but the Carters sensed something deeper had taken root. The bond became both a comfort and a complication. Ethan's delight in caring for Buddy was undeniable, his small hands gentle, his voice endlessly soothing. He sat for hours reading picture books aloud as though Buddy could understand every word, and in return, the dog's eyes followed him with unwavering devotion. Yet for John and Anna, the dependency grew troubling. When Anna tried to brush Buddy's coat, he flinched. When John attempted to coax him outside, Buddy planted his paws unmoving until Ethan appeared. The boy's presence seemed to unlock the dog, but without him, Buddy remained a closed door. One evening, as twilight bled into the living room, John voiced what had weighed on his mind. "This isn't normal," he murmured, watching Ethan stroke Buddy's ears. "It's not just trust Anna. It's like the dog has chosen him, and only him." Anna admitted the thought had haunted her too. She worried about the pressure on Ethan, such responsibility for a child his age, yet each time she considered separating them, Buddy's whimpers and Ethan's tears dissuaded her. The sight of them together carried a tenderness she could not bear to break. As Buddy's strength began to return slowly, his steps still shaky, but his eyes brighter, the depth of the connection only grew clearer. He shadowed Ethan through every room, refusing even brief moments apart. When Ethan left for kindergarten one morning, Buddy planted himself by the door, pacing and whining until the boy returned. Anna, standing helpless in the kitchen, realized the shepherd would not be soothed by any voice but Ethan's. The puzzle of Buddy's survival in the wall, paired with this singular attachment, weighed heavier with each passing day. John began rereading the house's paperwork, searching for overlooked details about the renovations, while Anna found herself drawn to old neighborhood stories. Something in her bones whispered that Buddy's bond with Ethan was not merely a quirk of trauma, but a sign of something hidden in their home's past, something that demanded uncovering. One chilly Saturday morning, Anna decided to walk across the street with Ethan to visit Mrs. Walker, the elderly neighbor who had waved to them kindly when they first moved in. Buddy followed close to Ethan's side, his gait still fragile yet more determined with each step. Mrs. Walker welcomed them into her cozy living room that smelled faintly of lavender and old books, motioning them to sit while she poured tea. As Ethan settled on the rug with Buddy's head resting on his lap, Anna gently asked if Mrs. Walker knew much about the house's history. The older woman's eyes clouded as she set her cup down with deliberate care. "That place of yours," she said slowly, "used to belong to Charles Miller. He was quiet, kept to himself, but everyone knew he had a German shepherd. Big, handsome thing. Looked just like your dog there." Her voice wavered as if the memory carried unease. "One day Charles disappeared. Just gone. And so did the dog. Folks assumed he moved away, but nothing was ever settled. No farewell, no sale sign, just emptiness until the house went up for renovation." Anna felt a chill creep up her arms. She asked whether anyone investigated, but Mrs. Walker shook her head, explaining that the police checked briefly and found no foul play, though whispers lingered. That afternoon, back at their own home, Anna recounted Mrs. Walker's story to John, who listened with his brow furrowed. The coincidence was too sharp, a missing man and a missing shepherd, that matched Buddy's appearance. They decided to probe further, starting with the local post office. The following Monday, John stopped by and asked whether anyone remembered delivering mail to Charles Miller's address. A retired carrier named David Collins happened to overhear. David, a wiry man in his 60s with a weathered face from years of walking routes, stepped forward. "I remember him well," David said. "Strange fellow. Rarely spoke, always seemed nervous. But what stuck with me was the way he treated that dog. He kept it close like it was his shadow. I saw him walking it every evening without fail, always the same loop around the block. Then one day the walk stopped. The house grew silent. Mail piled up for weeks before the authorities intervened." David leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You know there was something else. I once heard barking inside after he had already vanished. I mentioned it to the police at the time, but they brushed it off. Said maybe a stray wandered through an open door." When John shared this detail with Anna, unease deepened between them. Buddy, who now lay curled at Ethan's feet, seemed to embody the mystery. How could a dog vanish with its owner only to resurface years later, sealed within a wall? John began researching public records, combing through old property documents and renovation permits. He found that Charles Miller never filed a forwarding address or sold the property himself. Instead, the deed transferred abruptly to a holding company. then to the developer who renovated it. The trail ended cold, but it left more questions than answers. At night, Anna's dreams grew restless. She pictured Charles pacing with his dog, his shadow stretching across the street, then dissolving into the unfinished walls of their home. She woke with the echo of faint barking in her ears, only to find Buddy pressed against Ethan's bed as though guarding him from unseen threats. The next morning, she urged John to consider contacting Detective Harris, the local officer who had handled the welfare check years earlier. John agreed reluctantly, worried about alarming Ethan but determined to know whether there had been more to Miller's disappearance than neighbors assumed. Meanwhile, Ethan's connection with Buddy only grew deeper. The boy began drawing pictures of a man walking a dog down a tree-lined street, insisting Buddy remembered. When Anna asked how he knew, Ethan said simply that Buddy showed him. The simplicity of the child's certainty unsettled her. She wondered if trauma left behind invisible imprints, perhaps carried between the shepherd and her son. Later that week, John managed to speak briefly with Detective Harris at the precinct. The detective admitted the case had never sat right with him, though without evidence it remained unsolved. "A man doesn't just vanish," Harris said, tapping his pen on the desk. "And a dog doesn't end up bricked inside a house without someone putting it there. If your shepherd is the same one, then we're looking at a crime, not a disappearance." He agreed to reopen the file, but warned progress would be slow. Still, the Carters left the station feeling a grim validation. What they had found in their basement wall was more than misfortune. It was a clue. Back at home, as twilight settled across the neighborhood, Ethan sat with Buddy in the living room, stroking his ears while whispering about school stories and secrets. Buddy's eyes, deep pools of loyalty and sorrow, seemed to flicker with recognition when the boy mentioned the name Charles, though no one had ever spoken it in front of him before. John and Anna exchanged uneasy glances. The past was no longer just history told by neighbors. It was seeping back into their home, threading itself through their child's bond with the dog. Detective Harris kept his word and began reopening the old case file on Charles Miller. Late one evening, he called John to meet him at the station, where he laid out a worn manila folder filled with reports, interviews, and faded photographs. Harris explained that while the official report concluded Miller vanished without evidence of foul play, the file contained whispers of darker suspicions. Years before, neighbors had quietly reported Miller for possible animal abuse. A complaint had been filed after a passerby claimed to see him yank his shepherd harshly by a chain, but the investigation stalled when no direct evidence emerged. Nothing stuck. Harris set his voice low. But there were patterns. The man was isolated, secretive, always working on something inside that garage of his. John sat across the desk, flipping through the pages, his unease growing with every note that suggested cruelty hidden behind Miller's quiet demeanor. Harris admitted the department's attention waned once Miller vanished, chalking it up to a troubled man who walked away from his life. But if your dog is his, then Miller didn't walk away at all. "Something else happened here," the detective added, sliding the folder across the table. Back at home, John shared the unsettling details with Anna, who listened with her hands clasped tightly together. The thought that Buddy had once lived under the care of a man suspected of mistreating animals made her chest tighten. But when she looked at the dog curled protectively beside Ethan, she knew his resilience was proof of his spirit. Still, she could not ignore the gnawing question of how Buddy had endured. That weekend, John decided to clear out more of the garage, hoping to uncover overlooked traces of the house's past. While shifting old paint cans and rusted tools, he noticed a heavy steel cabinet pushed into a corner, its surface scuffed but sturdy. A padlock hung on the handles, rusted but intact. John debated whether to pry it open, but the weight of curiosity pressed too heavily. With a crowbar, he forced the lock until it snapped. The cabinet doors groaned open, revealing chains coiled neatly like serpents' collars with worn leather straps and steel bowls stained by time. On the top shelf sat several small notebooks bound in black covers. John's stomach tightened as he lifted one and flipped through its pages. What he found was not a diary in the ordinary sense, but meticulous records written in tight, slanted handwriting. Each entry described routines, feeding schedules, and exercises, except they grew stranger with each page. The notes detailed experiments with isolation, prolonged confinement, and attempts to reshape loyalty through deprivation. The language chilled John to his core. One passage read, "The animal resists. Hunger weakens it, but also sharpens dependence. A test of control." John carried the notebooks inside, spreading them on the kitchen table for Anna to read. Her face blanched as she skimmed, whispering, "This isn't just neglect. He was treating the dog like a project." They decided to contact Detective Harris again immediately, who arrived that evening to inspect the find. Harris carefully bagged the notebooks and photographed the cabinet. "This is significant," he said gravely. "It changes the picture. Miller wasn't just eccentric. He was methodical, maybe even dangerous." Meanwhile, Ethan sensed the shift in his parents' mood. He sat on the floor beside Buddy, stroking the shepherd's back while humming softly, trying to keep the dog calm amid the tension filling the house. Buddy leaned into the boy as though he understood the weight of the discoveries around him. Ethan later whispered to Anna that Buddy didn't like the garage, that he trembled whenever the door creaked open. Anna pressed her lips together, realizing the garage had been a place of fear for the animal now uncovered as a chamber of secrets. Over the next days, Detective Harris continued piecing together fragments of Miller's life. He visited the town library to pull property tax records and spoke with the renovation crew who had worked on the house after Miller disappeared. One contractor recalled stumbling across locked sections in the basement and garage, but admitted they ignored them to finish the job quickly. Another mentioned finding scraps of paper with strange notes, but discarding them without thought. Harris began to suspect Miller may not have left voluntarily, but rather met a darker end tied to his obsessions. At home, John wrestled with a growing sense of unease. He told Anna he worried they had stepped into something far deeper than they expected, but she reminded him that Buddy's survival mattered most. Ethan's bond with the shepherd was unshakable, and their son had grown more confident and secure since Buddy came into their lives. Yet the shadows of Miller's experiments loomed, suggesting unfinished stories buried within their walls. Late one night, unable to sleep, John returned to the garage with a flashlight. He studied the cabinet again, running his hand along the back panel. Something felt off. The surface didn't echo like the metal doors, but sounded hollow. Kneeling closer, he tapped until he located a concealed compartment. He forced it open, uncovering a final notebook tucked behind the steel. This one differed from the others. Its first page carried a date only weeks before Miller vanished. The entries were erratic, the handwriting more jagged. They spoke of losing control of the subject, resisting longer than expected, and of an urgent need to seal it away before it breaks me. The last line, scrawled with trembling ink, read, "Tomorrow I end the test. No one must ever know." John stood frozen, the flashlight beam trembling in his grip. The discovery suggested Miller had intentionally hidden Buddy, perhaps planning to leave him entombed forever. But if Miller had meant to return, why never reappear? John closed the notebook with a shudder, sensing that the answers lay not just in the garage, but in the broader mystery of Miller's fate. The house lay quiet beneath the blanket of night shadows stretching across the living room floor, while the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. John and Anna were upstairs asleep, but Ethan had crept out of bed restless after the heavy conversations that had weighed on the family for days. Buddy lay at his side as always, the shepherd's ears twitching at the faintest noise. Just past midnight, a soft scrape against the back door broke the stillness. Buddy's head shot up, his body tense. Before Ethan could react, the dog let out a deep growl. His eyes locked on the door as if he sensed something foreign and unwelcome. Ethan froze, his heart pounding, and then the metallic click of a lock being tested shattered any thought that he imagined it. Buddy bolted upright and barked sharp and urgent, loud enough to jolt John and Anna awake upstairs. Ethan shouted for his father just as the back door creaked open. A dark figure slipped inside heavy boots, leaving wet marks across the kitchen tile. Buddy lunged, teeth bared, positioning himself between Ethan and the intruder. The man cursed under his breath and staggered back at the ferocity of the dog's defense. Ethan screamed for his parents again, his voice breaking with fear, but Buddy's barks drowned out everything as he charged forward. The intruder swung an arm as if to push the shepherd aside, but Buddy snapped down close enough to tear fabric from the sleeve. The man stumbled, nearly losing his balance before bolting back out into the night. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving muddy footprints and a trail of adrenaline in his wake. John rushed downstairs with Anna close behind, finding Ethan clinging to Buddy, his small hands buried in the dog's fur. The boy's face was pale, his body trembling, but Buddy stood tall and alert, his chest heaving with growls that hadn't yet subsided. John quickly secured the door while Anna checked Ethan, who burst into tears once the danger passed, burying his face against Buddy's neck. The shepherd nuzzled him softly, a silent reassurance that he was safe. John called Detective Harris immediately, his voice tight with urgency as he explained what happened. Within 20 minutes, the detective arrived, his flashlight sweeping over the muddy tracks leading away from the house. The prints were clear, heavy work boots with a distinct tread pattern leading toward the side yard, before vanishing into the darkness beyond the fence. Harris crouched low, studying them carefully. "This wasn't some random burglar," he muttered. "He wasn't here for valuables. He was after something specific." When John asked what he meant, Harris gestured toward Buddy, who still sat protectively beside Ethan. "Your dog might not have been the only thing Miller was working on. Someone knows what was hidden in this house and they want it back." The words unsettled Anna, who asked if they were in danger. Harris reassured her that patrol cars would keep an eye on the street for the next few nights, but his expression betrayed his deeper concern. He had seen enough cases to know when a pattern suggested more than coincidence. Later, while Ethan finally drifted to sleep, curled against Buddy Harris, pulled John aside and explained his theory. He believed Miller hadn't acted alone. The meticulous notebooks and experiments suggested a network, or at least someone aware of his work. The break-in, Harris said, could very well be a desperate attempt to recover documents or evidence Miller left behind. John admitted they still had the last notebook hidden upstairs, the one describing Miller's final days. Harris requested to take it into evidence, fearing it might be the very thing the intruder sought. John hesitated, torn between wanting to cooperate and fearing losing the last tangible clue about Buddy's ordeal. Finally, he agreed, handing the notebook over with a heavy sigh. Harris promised to guard it carefully, knowing its importance. The following day, Harris returned to share his initial findings with the Turners. The tread from the muddy boots matched no one in the immediate neighborhood, but it resembled a type used by industrial workers, common in factories or warehouses. More troubling, Harris had discovered that Miller had once worked briefly at a chemical plant outside town, a place with a reputation for questionable practices. "It's possible someone from there knew what he was doing," Harris said. "And they don't want that knowledge coming to light now." Anna sat silently at the table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold while John tried to piece the threads together. If Miller had connections who knew about Buddy, then what else had they hidden? And why return after so many years? Ethan listened from the corner, his arms wrapped around Buddy. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Buddy knew he was coming. He wouldn't let him hurt me." His words carried an innocence that steadied Anna's heart, but they also underscored the reality without Buddy's protection. The night could have ended differently. That evening, John installed new locks and motion sensors, while Anna double-checked the windows. Buddy never left Ethan's side, his watchful eyes following every shadow across the walls. For the first time, the family felt like their home had turned into something fragile, vulnerable to forces they barely understood. When Harris stopped by once more to check on them, he confided his next step. He intended to revisit the chemical plant records, searching for anyone tied to Miller who could fit the profile of the intruder. If Miller wasn't alone, then someone else knows exactly what he left behind, he warned. And they won't stop until they find it. As Harris drove away, his taillights fading into the night, John stood at the window with Anna, both unsettled by the thought that their discovery of Buddy had pulled them into a story much larger and darker than they ever imagined. Upstairs, Ethan whispered goodnight to Buddy, his words heavy with gratitude. "You saved me." Buddy laid his head gently across the boy's lap, his eyes never leaving the window, as if he knew the threat was far from over. Emily had been struggling to sleep ever since the break-in. Each creak of the house made her heart race, and every time Buddy shifted at the foot of Ethan's bed, she found herself wide awake, listening for sounds that didn't belong. One morning, while tidying Ethan's room, she bent to push a stray toy car back under the bed, and her hand brushed against something stiff and out of place. Curious, she reached further until her fingers closed around a large envelope thick with contents. Pulling it out, she realized it wasn't dusty like forgotten items usually were, suggesting it had been hidden recently or placed with care. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, their edges curled slightly with age. The first image made her throat tighten. Richard Hale, the former owner, smiling stiffly in front of the house with a German shepherd that looked exactly like Buddy, though younger and healthier. Flipping through the stack, Emily found more disturbing shots, rows of dogs chained to stakes, some German shepherds, some other breeds, all looking gaunt and defeated. In a few photos, Richard stood beside them, holding notebooks, similar to the ones John had found in the garage. It wasn't just a man with a pet. It was a record of cruelty, deliberate and methodical. Emily quickly tucked the photos back into the envelope, unsettled by the thought that these images had been left behind under her child's bed of all places. She wasn't sure whether Richard himself had hidden them, or if someone else planted them later, but the implications chilled her. That afternoon, Ethan tugged at John's sleeve while they worked in the yard. "Dad," he said earnestly, "Buddy keeps going to the corner of the garden. He scratches at the dirt and then looks at me like he wants me to dig." At first, John brushed it off as a dog's instinctive behavior. But Ethan was insistent, his small hands tugging his father toward the farthest patch of ground near the old fence line. Buddy stood there, already pawing at the earth with growing urgency. Against his better judgment, John fetched a small shovel, mostly to satisfy Ethan's determination. As he dug, the soil turned darker and looser, and soon the metallic scrape of the shovel against something solid made him pause. Carefully brushing away the dirt, he revealed fragments of bone. His breath caught in his throat as the realization sank in. Ethan crouched low, his wide eyes filled with confusion. "Is that another dog?" he whispered, his voice trembling. John quickly pulled him back, his own stomach tightening with dread. They unearthed more bones, each unmistakably canine, tangled with fragments of collars and rusted chains. The sight was sickening, a grim confirmation of what Richard's photographs had hinted at. Buddy whined, low pacing near the disturbed soil as if recognizing the remains of those who came before him. Emily rushed outside when she heard the commotion and stopped dead at the sight of the shallow pit. She held the envelope in her hand, unable to speak at first, then silently extended it toward John. He took one look at the photographs and felt the weight of everything fall into place. The experiments, the journals, the scars. Buddy carried the break-in and now the bodies. Richard Hale had not just been a troubled man. He had been systematically cruel, leaving behind victims whose suffering had been buried both in earth and in silence. Detective Harris arrived within the hour after John called him, bringing a forensic team that began carefully excavating the site. Ethan sat on the porch with Buddy pressed against his side, his eyes watery as he whispered, "They were like him, weren't they? Richard hurt them too." Anna wrapped her arms around her son, shielding him from the worst of the scene, though she knew he had already seen more than a child should. Harris studied the photos Emily had found and sighed heavily. "This isn't just evidence of cruelty," he said grimly. "This could explain why someone broke in. If there are more photos, more records, they might expose people Richard worked with or sold animals to. Someone wants those buried just like these dogs. The discovery rattled the neighborhood once word spread. Mrs. Green, the elderly neighbor who had mentioned Richard's odd behavior months earlier, visited that evening, her face pale as she whispered, "I always thought something was wrong with him, but I never imagined it was this." Her eyes lingered on Buddy, softening with both pity and admiration. That dog is a survivor. Later that night, after the police left with the photographs and the remains, the Turner family sat in the living room, the weight of the day pressing on them. John confessed that he felt sick for not realizing sooner the depth of Richard's cruelty. Emily tried to reassure him that no one could have anticipated what they would find buried beneath their own garden. Ethan remained quiet, his small hand stroking Buddy's fur as though grounding himself. Finally, he whispered, "Buddy wanted us to know. He wanted us to find them." Though none of the adults answered directly, they couldn't deny the eerie accuracy of Ethan's words. Buddy had indeed led them to the graves, and his behavior had been far more deliberate than coincidence. It left them wondering just how much the dog understood and how deeply he remembered what had been done. That night, sleep eluded them again. The unearthed truth cast a heavy silence over the house, making even the familiar walls feel alien. John lay awake, considering Harris's warning: if someone wanted to keep Richard's secrets hidden, then unearthing the bodies meant the Turners had crossed a line. Outside, Buddy paced near the back door, his ears constantly pricked, as though he too expected the shadows to move. The week after the graves were unearthed stretched into uneasy silence. The Carters tried to settle back into routine, but the weight of what they had found pressed against every corner of their home. Detective Harris assured them the evidence was under lock and key, yet his eyes warned them vigilance was necessary. Buddy grew restless at night, pacing near the doors and windows, his instincts sharp and unrelenting. One Friday evening, as autumn leaves rattled against the siding, the family gathered in the living room. Ethan was curled against Buddy on the rug, his small hands tangled in the shepherd's fur, when a sudden thump sounded against the back porch. Buddy stiffened immediately, his head snapping toward the noise, a growl rising low in his throat. John rose from his chair, motioning Anna to stay with Ethan, and stepped cautiously toward the kitchen. The back door rattled once, then swung open with force, revealing a tall man with a hard face and eyes that carried an unsettling calm. He stepped inside without hesitation, his boots leaving streaks of mud across the floor. "I'm Frank Doyle," he said evenly, his voice too smooth for the menace in his stance. "And I've come for what's mine." John tried to steady his voice as he demanded Doyle leave, but the man ignored him, his gaze falling directly on Buddy. "That dog doesn't belong to you," Doyle said coldly. "He is the last subject of our work. Richard may be gone, but what we started doesn't end until I say it does." Anna stepped closer to Ethan, pulling him back while Buddy pressed against the boy, his growls intensifying. Doyle reached into his coat and pulled out a leather leash and steel collar, letting them dangle as though presenting proof of ownership. "Hand him over," Doyle continued. "He is not a pet. He is evidence of years of study. You have no idea what that animal is worth." John's jaw tightened, anger breaking through fear. "He's not your experiment. He's our son's dog now, and you'll leave this house immediately." Doyle smirked, shaking his head slowly. "You don't understand. That dog survived conditions that should have killed him. He is proof of what Richard and I accomplished. Without him, our work dies. I won't allow that." He took a step forward, his eyes narrowing on Buddy, who barked fiercely. Teeth bared, body planted like a shield before Ethan. Doyle lunged, and chaos erupted. Buddy charged, slamming against Doyle with surprising force for his weakened frame. The leash clattered to the floor as Doyle stumbled back, trying to regain control. Ethan cried out, but Anna pulled him close, shielding him with her arms. John rushed forward, grappling with Doyle, the two men struggling as furniture toppled around them. Buddy snapped at Doyle's arm, forcing him to release his grip on John, and the intruder cursed as blood blossomed from the torn sleeve. Furious, Doyle shoved Buddy aside and reached again toward Ethan, shouting that the boy was the reason the dog resisted everyone else. "He's tied to that child. Break the bond and he'll return to obedience." The words struck John and Anna with horror. But before Doyle could advance another step, Buddy launched again, his body a blur of loyalty and rage. He knocked Doyle off balance, pinning him against the floor with teeth bared inches from his throat. Ethan, shaking, whispered softly, "It's okay, Buddy. I'm here." And the shepherd's growls steadied his weight, holding Doyle immobile until John managed to grab the man's arms and force them behind his back. Anna dialed Detective Harris with trembling fingers, her voice urgent as she explained the break-in. Within minutes, sirens pierced the night, their wails flooding the street. Harris and 2 officers entered quickly, their weapons drawn, until John stepped back, raising his hands to show control. Buddy held his ground until Ethan called him away, and only then did the shepherd retreat, positioning himself protectively beside the boy once more. Harris snapped handcuffs on Doyle, who glared at the family with eyes full of venom. "You've ruined everything," he spat. "That dog was never meant to be yours. He was ours. You'll regret this." Harris pulled him to his feet, unfazed by the threats. "You're finished, Doyle. Whatever you and Miller were doing ends tonight." As Doyle was led out into the flashing lights, Harris turned to the Carters. "You saved more than yourselves. That dog is living evidence of cruelty that will close doors on people like him for good." John nodded wearily, the adrenaline draining from his body. Anna knelt beside Ethan, who clung to Buddy, whispering thanks into the shepherd's ear. The dog licked his face, gently, tail wagging weakly but proudly, as though he understood the victory belonged to them both. The days that followed brought investigators' statements and headlines, but within the Turner home the focus remained on healing. Ethan slept soundly again always, with Buddy pressed close, and the shepherd's strength began to return with steady meals and gentle care. Harris confirmed that Doyle's arrest connected him not only to Miller's experiments, but also to a network of illegal activities that would unravel fully in court. The Carters' role in exposing the truth was undeniable, though they tried to shield Ethan from the attention. One quiet evening, as autumn settled fully over the neighborhood, John and Anna sat on the porch watching Ethan play in the yard with Buddy chasing clumsily after a ball. The sight brought a sense of peace they hadn't felt in months. "He saved us," Anna said softly, her eyes glistening. John nodded, his gaze fixed on the boy and his dog. "And we saved him. Maybe that's the way it was always meant to be." Inside the house, the patched wall in the basement and the scars of their ordeal remained as reminders of the darkness they had uncovered. Yet the home felt alive again, filled with laughter and the steady rhythm of paws against hardwood. Buddy no longer paced at night, content to rest beside Ethan, his loyalty unshaken. The Carters knew the past could never be erased, but it no longer held them captive. They had faced it, endured it, and emerged whole. On the last night of October, as children in costumes filled the street with laughter, Ethan leaned against Buddy, whispering a simple promise. "We'll never let you be alone again." The shepherd closed his eyes, his body heavy with trust, his heart finally at ease. The bond forged in suffering had become their family's strength, proof that even in the darkest stories, loyalty and love could write a different ending. That was Ethan and Buddy's incredible journey, but now I want to hear from you. What part of their story shocked you the most, the moment they broke down the wall or the night someone tried to take Buddy away? And tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the bond between humans and animals.